In 1994, when I was 23, I decided to go on a week-long camping trip alone to get my thoughts together. I had just graduated from college here in California and needed to make some decisions about my future. I decided to go camping in the Los Padres National Forest, as I have been there before as a kid, and it was quite peaceful. I packed my things, drove to the park, and bought the week primitive camping pass that I needed. I told my parents where I was going, and they weren't too excited about me going alone, but as I was a well-built male, they only asked that I pack a knife for protection. I obliged. I parked my car and set forth down the trail that I had chosen. My plan was to hike to a small pond that was about 12 miles down the trail and spend the week there fishing, relaxing, and thinking about what I should do with the rest of my life. I hiked from morning to about 6 p.m. and took my time taking pictures, eating my lunch, and even writing in my journal. At about 6 p.m. I finally reached the pond, and I unpacked my tent and equipment and got ready to sleep. I was so tired that I passed out and didn't wake up until the morning. In the morning, I made some coffee, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and threw my fishing line into the pond. Over a couple of hours, I caught a couple of bluegill and was getting some much-needed solitude. I gutted my fish and put them back in the water so they would stay cool for a couple of hours, so that I could make them for lunch. After this, I went to my tent and decided to take a nap. I fell asleep fast. About 30 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a woman crying hysterically from what seemed to be a few hundred meters away. I instinctively got up quickly and opened my tent and turned towards where I thought I heard the crying. What I saw scared me instantly. I saw a naked woman about 70 meters away, in what I guess was her 40s, walking in my direction. She had long brown hair that was tangled, and her face was contorted in a way that made her cries that much more frightening. This woman was filthy all over, and she was bleeding from what I could only describe as her groin/genital region. My first reaction was shock, but after a few seconds I cleared my head and ran into my tent to grab my knife. I then walked over to the lady who was still crying hysterically and asked her what happened. As I got close to her, she reached out to me as if to give me an embrace. I hesitantly gave her one of my hands to hold on to, and then walked her over to my tent. She didn't say a word. She just kept crying and leaning herself on me. When we got to my tent, I handed her some paper towels and some extra clothes I had. I then asked her again what happened, and if I could help her clean up, or help her in any way that I could. She ignored the towels and clothes, and just let them fall to the ground. She then asked in a smoky, exhausted, low voice if she could lay down in my bed. I thought she was a rape victim for sure, and told her yes, definitely. She then lay down on top of my sleeping bag, and just kept crying and shaking. I decided to just let her be for a while, and started packing my stuff, as I figured I would have to run back to get help for this woman as there was no cell phone reception there. After about 25 minutes, I collected all of my belongings and walked back over to the tent to see if the woman had calmed down. I unzipped the tent and looked inside. The woman was just laying there, no longer crying, but just staring at nothing. I asked again what had happened to her, but she didn't answer. I then began to tell her that I was going to run and get help, and that she could come with me, or just stay here until help arrived. Again, she said nothing. I then told her that I was going to run to the ranger station, and that I would be back as soon as possible. I left her some water and some food, and started walking back towards the trail. As I got to the trail, I heard a man's voice start yelling from across the pond from our point. I turn to where I hear the yelling, and I see a man about 200 meters away, also naked, with a long beard and lots of body hair. I could not understand what he was trying to say at first, but as he got closer, I could understand the words. "I am no good. I am no good. I am no good," in a low, almost unintelligible groan. I was so freaked out at this point that I was frozen in fear. I was thinking about my options when I noticed the woman getting out of my tent and starting to walk towards the man with arms wide open. He then began running towards her and she towards him. When they reached each other, they then embraced. At this point, I was in total confusion and shock about what was happening. I just stood there and watched whatever it was I was watching happen. After what seemed like 30 minutes, they let go of each other, and I could see them talking. The woman pointed towards me, and then pointed towards her stomach. They then talked for a little while longer, and then both of them started walking towards me. I again just stood there, trying to figure out what was going on. As they got within 50 meters of me, the woman and the man both yelled at me almost simultaneously, "You can help us." I, still confused, yelled back at them, "Help you with what? And what happened?" The man and the woman did not reply, but only put their arms in a baby swaddling position, and the universal signal for baby. I yelled back at them, "What baby?" in a concerned voice. The man then said, "I am no good. We need you for baby." I then said, "I don't understand," and started to take a few steps back. At this point, the woman grabbed 2 large rocks from the ground and handed one to the man. They then began running towards me. I was terrified and dropped my backpack on the ground and started sprinting as fast as I could down the trail. I could hear them screaming at me, "We need your help with baby," over and over again at me, and could hear them scrambling down the trail behind me. They had no shoes, and the trail was very rocky, so I knew that if I could just keep running, they could not keep running for very long. After about 15 minutes, I slowly heard their cries die down to the point where I could no longer hear them. It took me 6 hours to get back to the ranger station, with me running and then taking a break when I needed to. When I got to the ranger station, I threw open the door and began explaining what just happened to the ranger. He knew I was serious from the emotion that I conveyed, and told me that he was going to get some backup to go out there and check out the situation and retrieve my belongings for me. He advised me to just sit tight in the ranger station, and that they would be riding their ATVs out there within the hour. I told him that I would rather just go home, and that if he could, just to call me after they investigated the situation. He said okay. I drove the 2 hours home, told my family what had happened, and waited with them for the phone call. I ended up falling asleep on my parents' bed like a child, and slept through the night. The next morning, my father woke me up and told me that he had just gotten off the phone with the Rangers, and that they had taken a naked man and woman into custody. They told my father that the 2 people would not identify themselves, and that they were found on the trail walking in the direction of the pond. The man and woman were taken to a psychiatric hospital, and were both identified as schizophrenic individuals. Nothing else was known about them. They couldn't figure out who they were, and how they had gotten to that location. That is all they could tell us. As for my equipment, I told them that I didn't want it anymore, as much of it, I'm sure, was caked in blood, and who knows what else. We found out a few months later that the couple had set up a campsite hidden near the edge of the pond area, and that the Rangers had found one grave of their very small miscarried fetus. The man and the woman were identified as a married couple who had gone off their medication and decided to move out into the woods to live away from society. They, from what everyone guessed, had tried to start a family out there, but due to malnutrition, the woman had miscarried. I guess the man blamed himself for being no good, and wanted me to take his place in impregnating his wife. My name is Blue. Strange name for a strange woman, I suppose. I'm currently 23 now, living in the US again after moving between Russia to America. To start this story, I must ask that consideration of my age, previous abuse, and actions leading up to the result be judged open-mindedly. I was around 10 when this nightmare began. Most of the time, when people hear North Carolina, they think of the old country roads, sweet tea, and small towns. However, in all the places that I've traveled and lived on the East Coast, North Carolina has been one of the most unpleasant places I've had the unfortunate luck to live in. Allow me to set the stage. It was November 2002. I was a small, unimpressive child. Wire-thin reddish-brown hair, skinny with brown Bambi eyes, and a sunken-in face that made me appear melancholy. Despite looking odd, men seemed to always hover near me. Like I brought out the inner pedo bear within them. I won't go into details, but let's just say I've had a few surgeries regarding my female organs, and am now unfortunately barren, and I'm sure you can gather why. We lived in a rundown house, on a rundown street, in the middle of a small town ghetto. My mom was oblivious to the things I'd been subjected to. So because of these factors, I was a dysfunctional child with an extensive imagination. I would prefer to play by myself, but if there was a chance that I could have a friend in this lonely, cold world, I'd jump for it, even when they were more of a bully than a friend. I was, and currently still am, a black sheep. Making friends has always been very hard, and most of my life I've been subjected to cruelty and bullying. Beside our house were our neighbors, who owned 40 cats that all looked malnourished and dirty. To no surprise, these people were busted for meth labs that would impress a German chemist almost every month. How they managed to never go to prison is anyone's guess. Despite being gross and smelly, they were always kind to me. This will play a part later on. So there I was, coloring chalk on the road, when a boy slightly older than myself finds his way to my chalk box. His name was Manuel, but everyone calls him Alex. He was a rough-looking Mexican kid, the kind that had a mouth full of teeth that hadn't decided which way they wanted to protrude. He was that awkward fat skinny you see in kids all the time, with dark brown hair and mean eyes. Alex was lonely like myself, since we lived on a dead-end street with mostly older people and mean teens. I'll say now that he was most likely a product of his environment, since he had an abusive stepfather. His mother married a big obese white man who enjoyed making you feel 2 inches tall. He would constantly beat up Alex, his mother, and his mentally ill 7-year-old daughter, who was in fact his child. His name was Mark, and he made everyone around him uncomfortable with his disheveled, greasy appearance, baggy, disgusting clothes, and shoulder-length wire-straight hair. He was really tall, at least to me, being such a scrawny kid. What made me uncomfortable around Mark was the fact that his fat belly would always stick out under the bottom of his baggy, stained t-shirts, and he would often look at me while touching his unattractive places. He always had something mean or creepy to say. Since by then I had been sexually assaulted, I was already wary of men, so I kept my distance. And for good reason. Alex would go back and forth between bullying me and being my friend, and at the time I was so desperate for a companion, I accepted being a mentally abused human yo-yo. At one point, in our friendship, he ended up pushing me off my bike, leaving me laying on the road with a sliced open shoulder, exposing the top of my bone, as he rode my bike back to his house. Since my family consisted of only me, my mother, and my 2-year-old sister, confrontation was avoided. So anything stolen from me just stayed stolen. Fortunately, one lot up from our meth neighbors was a fenced-in garden 1 acre long, and then my babushka's house. That means grandmother in Russian. She was a fierce but sweet woman. Many would describe her as a mama bear, dangerously protecting her brood. She was very religious, and like most old women, a big gossip. She would often be the one demanding my things back from anyone who dared steal them. I am convinced she was a spy in her younger years, because this woman could find intel. Oddly enough, the week leading up to the murder of Alex and his family was that of a calm one, or so everyone thought. Living in the area we were in, it was a usual occurrence to hear loud, unsettling things. Train tracks adjacent to the start of the street had all manner of commotion blasting by at all hours of the day. Gunshots would be heard regularly because there was a small wooded area at the dead end of the street, followed by a creek leading to an abandoned furniture factory across from us. It seemed like a regular day. It was slightly warm, but otherwise a little chilly. My birthday was in a couple of weeks, and looking back, after what I discovered, I can't remember it. It was a normal thing for me to venture around the houses of our street in search of cool trinkets and stones. It was odd though. For a few days, Alex and his sister Kristen, who would usually be out and about, were nowhere to be seen. He would sometimes have to babysit his sister, while his parents did whatever. I hadn't seen them at all. Going to their house at the start of the street was a small walk, but I was used to it. My grandmother and mother always scolded me for going that far, but I was curious why my quote, friend, was absent. What I discovered changed everything. It was probably around 2 p.m. when I finally got the nerve to go. As I walked, I felt a feeling of dread come over me. Ever since I was a kid, I've had a sixth sense about people and places. It's hard to explain. However, when the house came into view, it seemed darker than ever. I stood on the street looking at the porch for some time, fighting the urge to just run back home. Curiosity unfortunately got the best of me. As I slowly crept up the wooden stairs, I smelt something so grotesque it made my eyes burn, like a pungent stink you can taste in your mouth. I slowly knocked. No answer. I knocked a few more times, but nothing stirred, which was weird because the family car was in the driveway, and they also had this awful yappy dog that would nip and bark at the smallest of things. I want to say that I'm not the type of person to just barge into someone's home, but I had an awful feeling, like your stomach turning upside down and you getting queasy. So, gathering my nerves and holding my breath, I opened the unlocked door. It was slightly dim inside, but a wave of putrid decay smacked me in the face, and the first thing my little eyes see after adjusting is blood all over the place. My eyes darted, and I saw someone laying on the ground, and on the couch I saw Mark, sitting with his head half gone, a shotgun laying against his chest. A lurch in my chest caused me to spasm backwards, and I fell straight on my ass, desperately trying to scramble to my feet. There was no doubt in my childish mind that this was real. I bolted behind their car, in total shock and terror. I was trembling, and I had it in my mind that whoever did this had seen me, and I was next. As a child, suicide never occurred to me. But to be fair, everything happened so fast, and I was so scatterbrained, that I was instinctually terrified. I ran behind the houses and backyards, making my way to the small wooded area near the creek. If anything, I figured I would be safe there, and it was the closest. Every sound was the murderer. Every little shadow in the corner of my eye, a threat. I'd never ran so fast in my life. After hiding by the creek for what seemed like forever, I decided to make a dash to my home. My mom wasn't there. She was probably right up the street at my grandmother's, doing what families do best, eating and bickering. I climbed through the window, ripping my knees up in my panic. Since bad things happened to me in the past, I made a safe place where no one would find me. A small cubbyhole leading inside the walls from a hole in my closet. I was just small enough to wedge myself in it with a flashlight, and that's where I stayed. A couple hours later, my mother burst through the door calling my name frantically, but I didn't budge. I can hear her searching the house for me, starting to cry. That's when I finally came out. I ran to her and just cried. I was covered in filth, and my knees were shredded. I must have looked awful. She couldn't get me to tell her why though, because out of fear, I thought I'd get in trouble for being at the start of the street, and that was not allowed. At the time, she didn't tell me why she was searching for me, but I soon found out. At the beginning of our street were ambulances, police cars, and all manner of news vans. Apparently, our next-door neighbors, the meth addicts, had seen the door slightly open at the Tedders. To everyone's surprise, they were related to Mark. That was when they investigated for themselves and came upon the body of Kristen, the mentally handicapped daughter of Mark, laying on the floor in her own blood. In the news, they said that Mark had been angry about his wife Elizabeth getting a divorce, but they agreed to still live together for the kids. He ended up supposedly taking some drugs and went insane with anger and smothered her and Alex in their beds. He then brought Kristen into the living room, where I had glimpsed them first, and shot her in the head with a shotgun, then killing their yappy dog, and finally sitting and eating a bullet. It was awful. I was so scared I was going to get in trouble that I completely stopped talking for a month. I wouldn't open up to counselors or therapists. I wouldn't say a word. No one ever came asking questions, however. I guess the police had their answers when they saw Mark. The murder-suicide stuck to the name of our street for years after that. No one would dare go down Bristol Street. It was a place of murderers and gangsters and death. However, it was the complete opposite. It was just a normal rundown street in a rundown town that unfortunately witnessed the slaying of a family by the hands of their supposed protector. What do you even say to someone who asks? I haven't found the right words yet. But in my opinion, I think Mark did it of his own accord. He had always hated Alex, and his only offspring was a special needs individual of whom he was ashamed of. I think he killed them because he honestly didn't love any of them. In the time that I had gotten to know the Tedders, I had never once saw him be affectionate towards them. You don't kill the ones you love like that. For years after, I was plagued with night terrors and fear. How does one put that kind of a scene out of their mind? Many people claim PTSD isn't a real thing, but I'd like to invite them to witness a brutal death like that and see how they fare. I slowly returned to my normal self, or as normal as a kid in my situation could be. I've never told anyone that I was the first one to happen upon the bodies of the Tedders family. Not until now. For years I was ashamed that I had never told someone or called the police, but I was a kid scared out of my mind. Even today, I still don't know what I'd do as an adult if I came across it again. I like to think of myself as a strong, fearless woman at times, but in all honesty, I feel like that small, scared little girl in a big, cruel world a lot. I don't know if I'm a product of my environment, but what I do know is how I am and what legacy I'd like to leave behind. I guess if anything, it made me stronger, but honestly, I just feel numb to tragedy now. All we can hope for is that they are at peace, and that Mark, that big sack of shit, is in some kind of hell for his unnatural actions against his family. I think the most upsetting part about all of this, though, is that Alex had an older brother that was away at university. I can only imagine what he still carries with him today. I know I still carry a small bit of it. I apologize that I can't find too many articles on this since it's been a long time, but I did find 2 of them, and I'll include them in the description. In 2007, I went on a date with a guy from Craigslist. I was 17 years old at the time. I put an ad up looking to meet someone. I don't remember the details. A guy responded who lived close to me, so I emailed him back and gave him my number. He was actually one of the only ones who responded without a creepy message. He said his name was John, and he was 26 years old. This guy, John, and I spoke for 2 days before meeting, and we met on a Friday night. We texted back and forth, and he asked if I was single. I said yes. He asked what kind of food I like to eat, because he wanted me to take him to a restaurant. I asked him a few questions about himself. He told me he still lived with his mother, but he had the top floor to himself, and that he was a part-time model that made good money. Judging by his picture, him being a model was fairly feasible. So on Friday night, John comes to pick me up. He drove a silver 2-door car, I want to say Ford. He popped me a message saying he was waiting outside, and after checking my hair and makeup for one last time, I said goodbye to my parents, telling them I was heading out to a friend's, and left. I got into John's car, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked exactly like his photo, the tall, dark, and handsome type. He had pale skin, with dark hair and dark eyes. He looked a little older in person, but he made up for it with a snappy fashion sense. He looked cool and cute. He was incredibly kind, and his body language and smile totally put me at ease. Yes, it's really stupid to go on a date from Craigslist, but surprisingly this guy was normal. We chatted for a while, and he started driving away from my hometown, towards the highway. He wanted to drive us into the city to go for dinner, which wasn't too far, around a 25-mile journey. John really started to reveal more details about himself on this journey. He told me that he was embarrassed to tell me that he lived with his mother, that I might think bad of him for not having his own place at his age. John got closer and closer to the highway, and I can't tell you what it was. I won't make it up because I don't remember, but it wasn't anything remotely creepy. I just felt put off by him. You know when you're on a date with someone and you're not sure, and they tell you something that's your biggest turnoff? It was like that kind of situation. Again, he didn't say anything too creepy, just off-putting. As we're getting closer and closer to the turnoff, I tell this perfectly nice guy, "I'm sorry, I don't feel like going to dinner anymore. I'm not feeling well." John's initial reaction was sympathy. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it my driving?" I told him I just didn't feel well. John then kept asking me, "What did I say? What did I do?" I told him it's not him, it's me. I wanted to go home because I felt ill. Then he said, "Okay, let me just drive around for a little bit more before I take you back. I don't want to end the evening like this." I knew that without him driving me home, I'd have to walk about an hour, maybe more, so I told him that driving for a bit sounded like a fine idea. But instead of him turning around and going back towards my house, he veered off and started heading to the town that I knew he lived in. I should mention that it was pitch black out, and the town where John lived was surrounded by dense woods. This isn't even worth mentioning if you take the highway and proper turnoffs to get there. But he decided he wanted to go via the back roads because it was more scenic, despite the fact that I couldn't see a thing. John had gone from being incredibly talkative to almost completely silent. He kept driving further into the wooded area. A few times I'd ask him questions about himself to break the awkward silence. At one point, I put my hand on his knee, affectionately, trying to regain the friendly, flirty banter we had earlier. He blanked me for the most part, occasionally answering in soft grunts and nods. It was like he was having a tantrum. John pulled into the parking lot for the forest. It was around 9 p.m., so naturally it was totally empty. He slowly kept driving, looking around for other cars, and then parked himself right at the end, close to the woods. There was nobody else in the parking lot, and I hadn't even seen us pass other cars to get there. For 10 minutes we just sat there, staring into the darkness ahead, which was disturbing. I think I managed to make small talk for maybe 5 minutes, which is a long time when someone isn't talking back. Then I joined him in the silence. I was afraid of appearing fake. I didn't want him to think I was scared. Some time of silence goes past, and abruptly John gets out of the car, closes the door, and locks the car. I was stuck inside. His lights were on, so I could sort of see ahead. In front of the cars there was a field that went on for maybe 20 feet, so really a patch of grass, and then beyond that were trees and dense forest. To the left was the rest of the car park, and the exit at the far end. To the immediate right was more forest with a small path. John disappeared into the forest ahead. I tried the handle on the door. It wouldn't open. I began to rationalize this. Maybe he accidentally locked the door. I was telling myself that if he really wanted to do something, he'd stay in the car. With no sight of John, I decided I needed to call someone. I looked around for my phone, and I couldn't find it. This was an old, silver, pay-as-you-go flip phone. I was confused that I couldn't find it because I had put it right next to me in the cup holder. After looking for it for a few good minutes, I became sure that he had taken it. Mind you, I didn't want to start rooting around his car, knowing he might be watching me. I didn't want him to catch on that I was freaking out. At this point, I started looking for my phone with only my eyes, instead of making it obvious. I was petrified that this guy was watching me panic in the darkness. My eyes were darting all around the floor. I looked up and squinted into the field and forest ahead. I saw him. John was standing about 10 feet from the car, on the small field. He was standing and smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. He looked freaky. This was not the same guy I got in the car with. I looked ahead and smiled back. I was still trying to act like his behavior was normal, like nothing he was doing was scary. Still smiling, his tongue began to protrude from his mouth. He stuck it out all the way. He began waggling his tongue up and down while maintaining eye contact with me. I felt myself tremble. I was trying to compose myself. Not taking his eyes off of me, and with his tongue still out, he started unzipping his pants. He took out his junk and proceeded to urinate in front of me while staring at me the whole time. This is the point I found it difficult to act like I was in on his behavior. I looked down at the floor, not wanting to watch what was going on in front of me. He didn't creep or slink back to the car. Instead, I hear his thundering steps and then a slam against the window. I guess at this point I was the luckiest person alive because another car pulled up into the parking lot. I don't know what this did to John, but he immediately got back into the car and laughed at me. That normal laugh, and said, "So do you like music at all? I'll put it on while I drive you home." And he did. He drove me all the way home. When we pulled up to my house, I went for the door, but it was still locked. "I want you to promise me something." I asked him what it was. "If you see me, if you ever see me after this, turn the other way. Act like you don't know me. If you see me with my family, don't you dare say a word. I don't expect to bump into you, but don't say anything." I agreed. I then asked him, "Have you seen my phone?" He told me no. I guess my phone was a small sacrifice for surprisingly making it home okay. When I got in, I said goodnight to my parents and went upstairs to my room and turned on my computer. I wanted to gather as much information about this guy as I could. Back then I used MSN Messenger, like AIM. It logged in automatically whenever I started up my PC. Now, before I get into the final part of this story, it's important that you know this. One day before I had been at my best friend's house. We had the kind of friendship where it was like, who could pick on the other the most? It was all good fun, and we mostly just ripped the shit out of each other and had a laugh. The day before, she had changed 2 contacts on my phone, an old prank, replacing the contact Mom with a guy I had been sending sexual texts back and forth with. I immediately knew she had done this because I saw the previous messages come up, but I didn't change the numbers back at the time, thinking I'll do it later. So when I logged on to MSN, I had a ton of messages from this guy, and a few from his friend. When John had locked me in his car, he had taken my phone and texted Mom, telling her that, "I'm sorry, but I've decided to move out. I've met someone. Please don't look for me. I'm happy being left alone." So another thing about the message was that it was all written in text speech. Swap please for PLZ, for example. And this guy knew I never texted like that. Aside from the message itself, this was a big red flag. He had texted me back, he showed me on cam, with a question mark, before asking again saying, "I don't think this is you. I know where you went, calling the police." This was incredibly quick thinking, as he had absolutely no idea where I was. I think that text saved my life that night, and it explains John's sudden change of behavior. If it wasn't the random car, it was the text. Afterwards, we tried to find this guy online by name and email, but couldn't find anything. It seemed like everything on him was fake. My best friend pressed me to call the police, but I never did because I feared the retribution I'd get from my parents for going on a date with a guy I didn't know. My friend ended up betraying my trust. I know she's the smart one, and told my mom anyway, who still didn't call the police, but instead did what I expected and banned me from my PC and going out, while also calling me an idiot. There is something else too. Turns out this guy's first name was John, and he did in fact live in the town that he said he did. Around 3 years later, I started going out with a guy from that very town, called Chris. We were talking about his exes one day, and I told him about my creepy encounter. I didn't even get halfway through the story before he stopped me and started asking questions about what John looked like, how old he looked, how old he said he was, etc. Turns out he knew him. This guy was now in prison for attacking and raping a 14-year-old girl and beating her bloody in a nearby park. Luckily, she survived without any long-term injuries. That was just what he said in prison, though. My friend told me that he was well known for being a creep well before that, and that his friends even called him Creepy John. He would go around nearby parks where he knew younger girls would be hanging out, and he would ask them to get in his car or to take their photo. He would always tell them he was a model, too. My boyfriend at the time first met him when he was 12, because John decided to take up skateboarding and tried to make some friends with lots of the young boys at the skate park. He couldn't believe I'd actually gotten in the car with him. If anyone is wondering, yes, this guy is still in prison today. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I really appreciate you all watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. And this is something I wanted to add at the very end about the story with the Craigslist date. If you're an underage kid, anytime you're tangling yourself up with a person who's that old or older and you think they're cool, it's not going to work out good. Save everyone the headache and save yourself the danger, and stick with children around your own age. Just my perspective. Try to stay safe out there. I asked him a few questions about himself. He told me he was still in love with his mother. Oh.